Geospatial technology is one of the enabling tools for innovative business models, integrating location into business processes of major IT solutions across the enterprise. In fact, everything happens somewhere, and location is fundamental integrator of business processes and workflows in a digital age. Numerous apps, solutions, and platforms leverage the power of location to deliver unique, innovative services, making businesses earn more profits, reach a wider audience, and bring convenience and comfort to people's lives. So let's make use of the location for their business, and what more can we expect from the future? Intro to yourself and your company, what you do.
Sure. So we can do this in less than a minute, hopefully. So Tivity Health is a leading provider of fitness and nutrition solutions for adults in America. And we recently, in the last few weeks, announced the acquisition of Nutrisystem, which is a public company based in Fort Washington, Pennsylvania, and that deal will hopefully close by the end of March if the SEC gets back to work, since the government's been shut down. Tivity has been around for quite some time with our most notable brand, Silver Sneakers, which is targeting an older American population with fitness solutions to help really solve important topics like social isolation and loneliness amongst older Americans. Thanks, Steve.
All right. Andy?
So Outfront Media is the largest out-of-home advertising company in the United States. We have about 70,000 billboards across the United States and Canada, plus the leading transit franchises, so New York, Boston, DC, Atlanta, Miami, Washington, Los Angeles, San Francisco. So if you're outside looking at advertising, you are probably looking at an Outfront asset in one major city or another. We use geolocation data, geospatial data, to be able to assess audiences as we're going into a world where we need to compete for different digital dollars. It is incumbent upon us to create a measurement system and a buying system that allows us to be able to compete with the Googles and the Facebooks of the world for bigger wallets from the big advertisers.
All right, very good. And Shivalak?
So hi, so I'm part of a company called MapMy India. We are India's largest mapping company, so we would compete with the likes of Google or here. Been in business for about 20 years, and we power the likes of Apple for the Indian market, and have been making maps. So if anyone's traveled to India, you can realize how complex it is to make a mapping system in a country like India. It's not straightforward. And we've been working with a lot of the large companies around advertising, making it more location contextually aware, offers and the likes, and outdoor.
All right, very good. So this panel is slightly different than some of the earlier panels in that we have a couple of folks who are representing advertising and marketing. And so I think you're going to get a more of a business perspective rather than just pure geospatial or other technology perspective. And let's start with, let's start with you, Andy. How does your company address the evolved next-gen marketing and advertising over the last couple of years? What's changed and how have you addressed it?
So if you think about out-of-home advertising, I'll put it in context. We are probably the world's second oldest business line. From writing on caves way back when to now just putting vinyl on billboards is evolved not much over the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. In the last 5 to 10 years, it's been pretty apparent that in the United States alone, there's about $208 or $210 billion spent in advertising, of all different kinds. We are about an $8 billion industry across the United States. In order for us to grow beyond that $8 billion bucket, we need to be able to provide the tool sets that the Googles and the Facebooks and the others use to attract media dollars. So it used to be a sort of spray and pay, where you just throw out some advertising and you hope that it kicks in. You don't know what Wanamaker's quote. 50% of my advertising doesn't work. I'm just not sure which 50%. So a lot of the chief marketing officers across the country have started to use analytics, which Google and Facebook provide, specifically to say you've targeted the right audience. And if you targeted the right audience, is there an attribution chain to which you can then attach yourself and say it had an effect to drive sales, basket size, foot traffic, whatever it is. And so we needed to be able to adapt to that future. We are a location-based medium, so using location-based data is sort of the right path to go upon. And so we've started to analyze pin drops at different places using mapping software and using geolocation data from Ground Truth and from other providers to be able to assess the audiences as they travel past those locations that we have advertising at, and to identify new locations that should be good advertising opportunities for us. So this is a good advertising opportunity because the number of people and the demographic associated with those people is attractive to advertisers. Therefore, let's find out who the landlord is there and get an opportunity to put some sort of an advertising thing there. As we transition to a digital publishing world, so now we're replacing static and vinyl with digital screens all over the place, we now have a chance to have dynamic content and move it around as audiences move throughout the day. And so you can assume that geospatial data allows us then to track audiences over a period of time and understand that we can then bring value to both the advertiser as well as to the consumer by delivering information at the right time and place.
In that context, does Upfront Media build user stores? Do you track users? Do you know your users? How do you approach? What we were talking about earlier with privacy and whatnot? How do you approach driving specific ads to specific users? Can you tell when a user has seen a billboard? Do you know when they've been near a billboard, and then you can retarget them in other locations?
I know I used the word track before, and you just used it again, and I should not have. So if Chuck Schumer was sitting here, and I want to make this perfectly clear.
Identify.
We've identified audiences.
That's not good either.
We identify audiences that are aggregated and anonymous. So we do it in pools greater than 25 people. So we have information data from cellular companies that give us location-based, so a number of pings throughout the day so we understand where they are. We then associate that data with other behavioral data sets so that we can understand where they are. And then we segment those data sets associated with some normal segmenting, audience segmenting software or like Axiom Personix clusters. We use those, or we can use others to associate those things. All done in clean rooms. We never take possession of PII. As a publisher, and certainly someone who does location data stuff, we want to be very clean. We wanted to be GDPR compliant before GDPR was even a thing. And to the extent that California has it and the rest of the United States will go in some form that way, we want to make sure that we are compliant with that. So I never know that it's Steve or me or anyone else in a particular spot, but I do want to know that there's a group of males between the age of X and Y with a household income of this, with the behavioral characteristics like that. And I can get all of that information and parse and push those data sets together in a clean room environment before I actually take possession of using it.
So you process larger groups of audiences without specifically identifying any individual.
Correct.
Got it. And Trivity, how has Trivity seen the change in the landscape over the last couple of years with advertising? I think your experience has been a little different than some other companies, and let's hear about that.
So at Tivity Health, we focus on this older population primarily, and I'll bet you didn't know that 11,000 people a day in this country are turning 65. It's kind of a remarkable number. 11,000 people a day are qualifying for Medicare or Medicare Advantage. It's the pig and the python is the baby boomer generation that's coming in a very rapid way to adopt technology in ways we've never imagined. If we look at technology usage for a 62-year-old versus a 65-year-old, smartphone technology, we've determined through our own research, is nearly 50% greater, just 3 years younger than the age of 65. So as that person ages, their willingness to opt in and use location-based services, I think, will expand dramatically. We have recognized the need to shift. Our own version of location-based advertising, we're geofencing 169 zip codes, but we're not doing it with technology. We're doing it the old-fashioned way, yet we serve 16.5 million adults. In fact, our target audience currently visits more gym locations than there are Starbucks coffee outlets, yet we're not doing anything in a really sophisticated way to reach them proactively to take action. So there's so much opportunity from an enablement and an education perspective, I think, for even the marketers in the room, the marketers in the proverbial room. I find it quite opportunistic for those in the space that can really move the needle.
Very good. And Shibboleth, you're going to have, I think, a slightly different experience, right? Coming from the mapping world. And you interact with companies like Outfront and companies like Ground Truth and Trivity. How have you seen the evolving of technology over the last couple of years as it relates to media and advertising?
I still remember about 10 years ago, there was a bank in India, one of the largest banks. There were about 40 million consumers. And the idea was to do location-based advertising, right? So if someone is passing by a mall and they have a credit card and there's an offer running on it, and if you opt in, you're able to get, okay, if you buy one beer free or something like that, right? And that was a wish list. You know, smartphones were not so popular, or Apple was just coming along. Come back 10 years forward, and it's a way of life, right? You get hit with offers all the time, and you expect it. As the panel before us said, 80% people do opt in if they see something being useful. From a mapping point of view, what we saw was, and I personally believe that the word technology, it depends which era you talk to. So if you talk to someone in 1910, technology was railways, 1950s may have been airlines. Today, technology is automation, right? Doing things faster. But at the end of the day, it's convenience with context, right? So anything that makes life easier and better, people will use. From a mapping point of view, what we saw was more and more detailed information from a map perspective. So a dynamic places data or a dynamic POI data. So is the coffee shop that opened up next door, or if there's a new vegan place that opened up next door, is it available on the database? Is someone checking in on to it? If someone's checking in, then you can do the rest of the piece, that how many footfalls happened, and I ran an ad campaign on one of these large online agencies. Hoardings is another interesting one. Hoardings are very expensive. If anyone's advertising hoardings, it's not cheap. It's not $10 a click or 10 cents a click. It runs into millions of dollars. How do you get value out of it, right? And are you getting the right person? Is the hoarding in the right place? So if, and I can correlate to New York, so if I am trying to sell watches which are high-end, I better be on, Park Avenue, or I need to be on Upper West Side. But if I'm going to do school children advertising, and if I have location-aware contextual data, I need to be in Battery Park or places where you have more children. So that is becoming more, so data becomes more and more important. All of us use an iPhone or an Android phone. It has phenomenal amount of technology inside it. The kind of chipsets and the positioning and all sorts of things. All you care about is, if you take a picture, does it come out nice or does it not come out nice? You don't really care how it works inside. So same thing for advertising. As long as it sells the products it's supposed to sell, and everything works like a clockwork inside, and the data is up to date and current, you don't really care about it. That's how we see it.
Got it. And let's continue on. So you're in India. You're working, and do you work primarily in India? Is Map My India outside the United States as well, or outside India as well, rather?
Yeah. So we do a lot of work around places curation or POI curation for large global companies across the world. So if there's a coffee chain based in the US and they want to see what happened in South Africa and how many footfalls they have, we will curate the data and kind of give that to them. And then on top of that, they would use companies like, let's say, Ground Truth, or if it's a Facebook or something, they will leverage our underlying data and then build a stack on top of it and measure it and work with companies like Andy's, right?
Building on something, Andy, you brought up, Shivlak, how does your company approach privacy? So you said a lot there, and I can tell that there is a lot of information that is knowable. What has the company done to protect consumers? What safeguards have you put in place?
So it's a good question. So one of the first, as we are mapping and we have survey cars and we take pictures and all sorts of things, the call we took was anything which is out on the street, which anyone can walk by and have a look at it, it's public, right? So if I have your door number, or if I have your nameplate, and stuck outside on a house, it's public data. Beyond that, I don't think I need to know what you do inside your house, right? So that's one point. From a movement analytics point of view, we're one of the largest telematics companies also in India. So we have, millions and billions of probe data points that come in every day. One of the things that we do is, if there is an app or we are back-ending another application, we make sure the beginning of the trip and the end of the trip, the last, the first 200 meters or the first 10% and the last 10%, we drop the data. right? So we don't really know where you started and where you ended. We just know that, this person or this thing moved from point A to point B, right? We do not differentiate it's a car or a truck or a person. It's just a set of data that moved. We can infer out of it, but we don't do it. That's something we don't do and we won't do.
And you don't tie it back to any individual or any residential address?
That's something we decided many years ago, and we don't want to do it. I don't want to be tracked, and I don't want to track anyone else. So it works both ways.
Ara?
Steve, I just wanted to comment on an area that marketers are most concerned about because it's something that we're measured on every day, and it's really around attribution and attribution modeling. And I think the greatest challenge that I face as I go to my CFO to get more funds to spend in advertising is the common question, can you prove an ROI? And I think for anybody in this space, whether it's Ground Truth or any of the other competitors in this space, it's really incumbent upon them to say that there's either last touch, there's something out there, like Andy was talking about earlier, that helps a marketer like me convince somebody that this is the best use of dollars today. And if we think from a marketer's perspective, it is about tracking back. Can we track back to an activity? So for example, if I geofence one of these 16,000 gym locations and get somebody to get out and get active, can I say that that actually translated into a gym visit? Because every time one of our members swipes their Silver Sneakers card, we get paid. How can I track that back to an event that was driven through location-based advertising? So I'm sort of feeding, I think, the industry the question that's going to be asked so that you guys provide a solution to somebody like me, but that's ultimately where, from a marketer's perspective, we need to make great strides, I think, to broaden the appeal of this type of advertising.
And then that begs the question, attribution versus consumer privacy. At what point do we get to, Andy, it almost seems to me like two competing interests, right? Because you can get pretty specific attribution, or we can back off that a bit, keeping an eye on consumer privacy. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it could be if you think about it from a very high level, but the architecture of the data and how you share data sets with different parties, so publishers, content owners, advertisers, all have to have some access to certain pieces of data, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to have all of the data. So for example, I may know that this aggregate group by IDFA of my phone has passed this particular billboard advertising location, and let's just say that you had your ad on there for Silver Sneakers, and then those people walked into you. I can provide you an API to understand what those are, and you can then take your membership data and associate it with that data set behind your wall. So I never know that those were the people that got there, but these IDFAs went there. Or some sort of a phone identifier went into that particular location. I can do that through third parties as well, where they aggregate data sets, where their first party data is always held by them, and I never sort of connect all the dots on my side, so that I can say from, if Chuck Schumer were here with the green felt table and all the senators and congressmen were up there and say, I swear I've never seen Steve's data as it walked through my system. Right? I understand that in groups of people, I provided data sets to other people who then aggregated that data associated with their first party data, loyalty programs, whatever it is. We have to get to that point. The industry, I spent a lot of time in meetings and businesses and with the MRC, the Media Ratings Council, which talks about measurement systems and audits those throughout the advertising world, about multi-touch attribution. So last click is something we mentioned about, hey, well, Google has always said the person who clicked on this and you went and bought something is the person who should get full credit for having delivered that ad or that customer. Not true, right? Certainly they went through the subway, they got a TV ad the night before, they were on their phone doing something, and then they went on a website and clicked on it. It wasn't the website that generated that particular customer visit. It was 7 other things that contributed to it. And how do you allocate that will be a very big discussion over the next very few years as we start to parse that and say the customer journey touched all of these different places. How then do we allocate value to each of those touch points such that we can give credit and value, so you can go back to your CFO and say, there was an ROI in these particular mediums, and here's how I aggregated that to be able to generate X number of customers through my place.
And then in this environment, this regulatory environment, this privacy environment we're in now, and I think it's going to get a lot stricter, How do you see the future of our ecosystem, of the ad serving ecosystem? What happens to third parties? What happens to that value chain?
You and I can spend a lot of time on this from a ground truth outfront perspective, but I do think right now we've got a world of sort of misaligned interests. So publishers, content creators, and advertisers are all, they're not structurally aligned. So they're spending a lot of money to try to reach customers that aren't necessarily efficiently reached through the mediums that we currently have. Content providers can't get paid because the publishers in a digital world with evasive advertising is inefficient, quite inefficient for what's happening. And so the customer experience is terrible. The advertisers aren't getting value for their dollar. Therefore, they're reducing their amount of buys. They're reducing, let's go make it real quick. So direct sales guys at publishers are being reduced quite substantially because fill rates and CPMs are going down, so they're firing direct sales guys and throwing that information into the ether, into the Google and Facebooks of the world, so that those exchanges are then becoming even more dominant than they were before. That doesn't work, right? So I do see some government intervention at some point in time. They've clearly got a red X on Facebook right now. That's going to change, and politicians are going to pick that up in the 2020 election as a talking point and probably something they'll have to do. Google is even bigger than that, and they're sort of left to the side a little bit, but there's too much power. If you do search and YouTube and 4 or 5 other businesses and you're going through DFP, there's way too much power and information associated with one particular company. It's much bigger than the Microsoft browser issue from a few years ago, right? So that has to change. And without getting too crazy, do we think about a blockchain? Do we think about a personal information vault where I associate the people that I want to associate with, and therefore allow them to use my information to get some sort of a loyalty or incentive program from a brand association? So if I'm a 65-year-old and I want to take advantage of the silver sneaker offer, I can do that. Therefore, you can use my information. There's a relationship here. I build loyalty with that particular brand, and that's a value-added relationship. And I do that with Uber and Airbnb and 6 other brands. And now my information in sort of a non-profit database somewhere is stored and then associated as I wish it to be, or I can clear it all out if I wish it to be. And then we take this away from everybody where I'm worrying about privacy, you're worrying about privacy, and the advertiser's worrying about privacy. It's something that is a completely different ecosystem. A long way away, but I can see it needs to be broken and fixed because it doesn't work for anyone right now.
And that's a pretty good segue into one of our next topics, and that's blockchain. So blockchain has been widely discussed, and I think over the last year or so, a couple of years, it seems as though some folks are viewing it as a silver bullet, as a means for tracking data, protecting consumer privacy, and all sorts of things. And Shibboleth and I were talking earlier before the panel, and he had a very good view on blockchain that I think we could all benefit from hearing.
I think I'm not an expert in blockchain, but whatever little bit I understand from, it's very similar to a torrent, right? The underlying concept is same, right? Shared data infrastructure on different people's computers or machines or something, right? Great technology, but I think a lot of it is, people trying to, it's a technology chasing a solution and not the other way around, right? I don't think it's a technology that's been built up. It's been there for a while now with different names, Nutella and blockchain and whatever new name you want to call it. But essentially, it's trying to now figure out how it can be used. And it needs a critical mass of users on that platform for it to make sense, right? If you don't have the critical mass, if you look at cryptocurrency right now, a lot of it is hype, but it will come. But I think it's still a while to go to become mainstream. From a geospatial point of view, I still think it's a long way to go from a blockchain perspective. You can add a lat-long component to it, but that's pretty much it. It's not out there yet, right?
I agree. It's overhyped quite substantially. It doesn't do a tenth of the things that people purport it to do so far, and it's a great technology. And privacy is one of the big opportunities associated with it, and controlling your own data as a consumer, going back into the advertising world, is a big piece of that. To the extent that I can find a value exchange where I alone allow folks to interact with my particular data set is pretty appealing once it has a function. Right now, it's kind of a nice to talk about thing.
Yeah. So something we didn't discuss was voice, right? And I had the opportunity to be at CES last week at Vegas, and the biggest thing about that space was voice, right? So if everything is going to go voice and people are not going to be searching on the phone and not going to be typing, and if anyone's got a chance to visit South Korea, they're already there. South Korea, I think, is like 15 years ahead of the rest of the world in technology. And people don't type anymore, they speak. So the concept of typing has gone away. So when you speak, the person that has the best voice engine, whether that's Amazon or Google or Nuance or one of these companies, it gets still tougher for a third-party company to come in and influence that because it's all voice-based. If you've seen younger children, if you have an Alexa at home or a Google Voice, the kids use it all the time, right? And incidentally, if you look at a lot of the Uber drivers in the Silicon Valley, they have an Alexa in the car, which has kind of become the new radio, right? They make a Wi-Fi hotspot and they use Alexa. Now there's a location context coming along with voice in a moving car, with no display ads, no banners, no clicks, nothing, right? So it may actually shift the entire advertising business model than how we see it today in less than 3-4 years, right? And South Korea has already gone there. So that's something new that's coming up, and how location plays into it will have to be seen, but it'll be interesting.
And can you extend that then further into AR, VR, and where they might intersect with location?
If you look at augmented reality, I think it's been there for a while. Samsung's been talking about it for some years. But I don't see a lot of use cases on it, right? I mean, I don't need to go around walking with my phone, and Google tried to do that with Google Glass, but technology was pretty good, it wasn't bad. But people don't want to wear glasses and go search for things. It's not something intuitively you're comfortable with. So again, it comes back to my original point. Just because the technology is there, that doesn't mean people will use it, right? They have to feel comfortable. And we also have to understand, as humans, we cannot be digitized completely. We only use 2% of our brains. Our brain will also evolve. So if you look at the example you gave, someone who's 66, and they're not comfortable with smartphones, but if you take a 2-year-old kid, who cannot read and write, but is very comfortable finding the right video on YouTube. If you give a small kid and you give him a smartphone and he's 1.5, 2 years, he's able to find his Peppa Pig and play the video, right, just by pictures. So the brain has evolved, right? So a lot of us are not mobile first. We saw analog and then we went into digital. So similarly, if you look at AI or artificial intelligence or augmented reality, AI has been there for a long time. There are no new algorithms that have come up. It's just that it's become faster. So anyone who comes from a mathematical background is just computing faster and trying to create a hyper customization for the person, right? Yes, location does come into it. It's just another infrastructure component, but as it gets better and better. So if you see Siri, for example, it's been there for a while now. Still not as good as you would thought of it, right? It's been almost 3-4 years now, right? And so many accents, so many ways, and it's a very hard problem to solve. It's not an easy problem, from a contextual point of view. So I think we still some ways to go.
And I think it's interesting. Ara was mentioning earlier in this panel that they're not even thinking about AR, VR. They're not, or maybe not even voice. They're still quite successful in some fairly, I think, dated advertising techniques, and they've had a lot of and pretty good results. And something Ara wanted me to address is, how do we think about media mix modeling and the share of location or lack thereof?
Yeah, so I wanted to bring it home. From a marketer's perspective, I can tell you that when I'm sitting in the boardroom and having a conversation about media mix modeling today, and this is really a challenge to all the marketers or the sellers of marketing solutions in the room, no one really is asking about location-based advertising or the model that we've been discussing today in any of its incarnations. They're talking about out-of-home, they're talking about TV, radio, print still, believe it or not, and they're talking about a whole host of digital solutions. I gravitated initially in 2009 and 10 to the model that Ground Truth, formerly XAD, was providing because I recognized how mobile our society was and how important it is to get people where they are at the moment of sale. And I've been an advocate, but I can tell you that when I speak about location-based to most leaders and companies, they glaze over because they don't really understand the true impact. So whether there's a lobbying arm for this industry, or there just needs to be a much more elementary sort of sales effort on behalf of companies providing solutions in this space. I think it's really incumbent upon you all to think about the recipient of the news so that I can think more holistically about how I segment the dollars I'm willing to spend. It's a huge opportunity, and I see the solution as something that can be quite differentiating for the segments of audience that almost any industry targets, maybe because it's either not viewed as proven driving ROI, previously successful because case studies haven't been really written and broadcast from the mount. I don't know what it is, but there's an opportunity here. And for those marketers who are courageous and step out, I think they can really win in the marketplace more effectively than if they just sat back and use traditional mediums.
Well, let me, if I can add to that, so I agree with you 1,000%. And one of the things is if you understand how, what, and why, understanding where adds a fourth dimension to this entire persona of a particular buyer or a potential customer. To the extent there, if you're driving past a Home Depot and you happen to see, I'll use billboards, an ad for Home Depot for fertilizer, you might be more inclined to go do that thing because you've been affected at that particular point prior to the point of purchase, but close to the point of purchase, rather than receiving a home fertilizer, lawn fertilizer commercial while you're sitting on television, lean back in a different environment. So your location provides a different psychographic set of information that allows the advertiser to be able to impact that buy or that purchase decision at a different point in the buying cycle. And it has become very important to us. We scream it from the rooftops as much as possible because it is who we are. But it adds to the dialogue you're having with the consumer through all these different mediums. I'll add to the context of the AR, VR stuff. VR's I don't know what the business model is for that yet. I mean, it's maybe product placement within an environment in which you're playing a game or something else. But AR has a lot of opportunity for it. I remember a gentleman who runs a very big AR company in the United States come to me as a friend and say, "Hey, Andy, we're either going to put you out of business or be your partner." That's how we started the conversation. So what do you mean? He goes, well, people are going to be walking around and I can change what's on the billboard because they're going to see something different than what you've actually placed there. And so we need to make sure that what is there at that particular point of presence is something you want them to see or an experience or a coupon they can touch on or do something with it. And I said, I'm not sure people are going to walk around with all these glasses all the time or walk around with their phones like this. So it will evolve, but in a transit environment, folks are walking around with their phone all the time, and if they adopt a new behavior to use their phone or to use glasses of some sort, they can make a much more interactive conversation between the brand and the publisher right there, or the consumer rather, right there, using the publisher's technology to be able to do that. So I think AR has a more near-term benefit than VR, and certainly something that will allow us to take more advantage of the technology that's already built into the phones that people just don't use yet.
If you look at from a technology point of view or from a media consumption point of view, a lot of the things that we do today, I mean, end of the day, you want to watch a good movie, right? Whether it's on Netflix or it's coming by a set-top box or whether it's coming on your app, who cares, right? The problem is the industry still categorizes it's digital or it's physical or it's online or offline. But end of the day, it's advertising. End of the day, it's consumption. How you package it, that differs, and how you project it, right? So if you look at Netflix, it's a very good example. India just got Netflix recently, like last year, and the consumption is really high, and they track the whole thing, right? They actually do track because they ask you that we're going to track where you're going, and they have licensing rights on different shows depending on where you're coming from, right? So if I'm in India, I have access to particular movies, but the moment I come to US, I don't have access to those movies because they don't have the licensing rights in the US, right? So location comes in over there. Is it advertising? I don't know, but it's a content licensing concept, right? But end of the day, it's consumption, and I would highly recommend if anyone's. I had a chance to travel to Egypt this last Christmas, and it is fascinating. The kind of clothes people wore 4,000 years ago, the food they ate, the beds they had, the shoes or the sandals they wore. It's almost the same like how it is today after 4,000 years. It has not changed. If you really look at what has happened in 4,000 years, so many religions, so many technologies, so many changes, but fundamentally nothing has changed. So So yeah, advertising will continue, and new technologies will keep coming up, and idea is just to sell something to someone else and convince them to buy your product. How you do it, it depends, right? And what's more effective. But I think there's no silver bullet. So like you have a truck and a car and a plane and a Maserati and a Tesla, they all coexist. And the question is how big the percentage is, right?
So on January 1, I launched our very first TV campaign for Silver Sneakers, and it's appropriately named Find Your Place. And we are receiving 85,000 calls a day into our experience center from our members and potential members since January 1 asking, where can I go work out? And within any location, any GeoMetro location, there are literally dozens, perhaps even hundreds of locations. Yet there isn't today an intuitive way for them to find those locations other than bombarding our experience center in Chandler, Arizona with a phone call. And I've got the leading question out there. I'm actually saying, find your place. That's literally the opening line and the closing line of the TV spot. And I talk about finding your fierce and finding your friendship, because that's what older Americans want to do in that social environment. So again, it's about laying this path to opportunity that's frictionless, with easy words that marketers can understand.
So we've talked a bit about technology, older technologies, and I think we heard about some things that we're not ready for, technologies that may be coming. Can you give us a sense of how you see in the next 3 to 5 years location and advertising changing from a technology perspective?
So I think screens will become more and more. So if you look at how the technology world works, it doesn't come out of nowhere. So if anyone's read Isaac Asimov, pretty much that's kind of the playbook here, right? Or Mission Impossible, right? I mean, these are some of the science fiction movies, and it's very similar. It's not very far away. So if you see a Mission Impossible, which or even a Minority Report, which happened many years ago, a lot of those things are becoming normal today, right? Eye tracking is a new thing that if you're in a car, depending if you're sleepy or not sleepy. So I think screens will become very popular all over the place. So like outdoor media, as you rightly said, will become, instead of vinyl, you will have, digital outdoor media all over the place, or maybe moving vans or things like that. As you wear more and more IoT devices on yourself, so a lot of us have sensors or, tracking or, running or, blood pressure monitors and implants. I don't know if you're at the tipping point yet or not, but I believe that a lot of people will start getting implants with chips inside our body. We will, the Singularity, if anyone's read the book, is supposed to happen in 2021, right? So there will be a section, maybe a very small percentage of people, but they'll start driving this change, right? And the screens and the location of how people are walking around. Walking is becoming more and more important. Everyone, more and more cities around the world are becoming walking cities. They're shutting down downtowns and they're removing the cars, and mobility is becoming, public mobility is becoming more and more accepted in the next, younger people. Car sales are falling across the world. So more and more people take buses, trains. So as they walk around, and if you know where they are, screens become more important. So it becomes a combination of, some kind of a sensor device and the ads that you see on things all around you based on who you are. So the ads may just keep changing depending on the set of people who are walking every 2 minutes or every 3 minutes. So something like Minority Report. I think that's what's going to happen in the next 5-6 years.
Andy, do you have anything to add to that? How do you see advertising and technology, shifting?
So everything we've been talking about is true, and I 100% believe with all that. We won't be Minority Report because I don't want it to say, hello, XYZ, welcome to the store. Do you want to buy that blue sweater in green today that you looked at last week online? And that would be really bad from a privacy standpoint. But we'll talk about something that we worry about a little bit, a very small amount, which is autonomous vehicles. And so, to the extent that over the next 5 to 10 years, autonomous vehicles become something of a reality, are billboards then relevant when people are going to be sitting in their cars, working on their phones or working on some other screen and not necessarily focused outside? But then you talk about an AR experience on the windows of the car or on the screens within the car, right, wherever you're sitting. And so all of a sudden the advertising surface becomes a different place for us to push content to and for publishers to interact with. Of course, that's a personal experience because it's your car, and so you're going to want, or your iPad now, it's similar, and you're going to want to make sure that's a curated experience. And so that back to that privacy thing, I want to understand that the relationship that I've established with certain brands has value to me, and that using my data to be able to make it more personalized or put it in the right context is something that I've approved. And so I do think that the evolution of this is going to happen. The ad tech market right now is a dumpster fire. It's a scary place to be, and the world is changing quickly with big gorillas, including the government, trying to take positions to advocate for certain folks. I don't think privacy is as big of a deal for the average consumer as the government thinks it is. Most people are willing to have an exchange of value for the right stuff, but they're not running around going, oh my God, I know I put all this stuff onto Facebook, wonder why I put that I like flowers and all of a sudden I'm getting flower ads. It's kind of understood that since I put that information over here that I'm going to get this type of an ad over there. But I think it will be a big issue in the government, and it's going to change a lot of the way things work. Technology-wise, it's all going to be more digital services, more interaction, more privacy, more curated experiences, and a value exchange or an alignment of interests that benefits both the consumer and the advertiser from an ROI standpoint.
So in early 2018, the UK announced the posting of a Minister of Loneliness because they recognize that over 9 million people in the UK, as odd as it may sound, are socially isolated or lonely. If you translate that number to the US, it's about 46.5 million people.
Wow.
We think about rural America, we're sitting on the coasts and everything's busy and bustling, but in the middle of the country, it's not the same. Social isolation and loneliness is actually being solved, if you will, through that device that is killing millennials, but actually is connecting older Americans. Facebook is actually the tool that many of them use, and it may be that we're an opportunity to connect with other family members. The phone call that we make as an outbound call to our Silver Seekers members, we're often told is maybe the 1 or 2 calls they get a week. And they're looking for social interaction. They're actually looking for opportunities for intersection. So the advent of Alexa and other tools like that, I think, can actually have tremendous application as the older population in this country grows. Joe Coughlin, who runs the MIT Age Lab, wrote a book about the $3 trillion economy and the amount of wealth that's currently in the hands of 65-year-old people and older is extraordinary. It's not with younger people and millennials, it's with older people. So I would challenge us all to think about how location can really impact the mobility and the happiness index of people who are older. I think there's a huge opportunity on the location side there as well.
Very good. So with that, I think we're out of time. Thank you for your time during this panel.